Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we've got a pretty serious case to unpack.
Yeah.
One that you brought to us, actually.
Absolutely.
And it comes out of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
And it deals with the Estate Police Association, so EPA,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and their handling of a wrongful dismissal case.
Right.
And what you've shared with us suggests that there might be some serious problems with how they handled it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a story about real people losing their livelihoods, and it's been going on for over a decade, this fight for justice. And it really kind of forces us to think about, some big questions about how accountable are these unions and how accountable is the legal system itself.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I mean, like when we talk about unions, like that's the point of them, is to protect the workers, to be the voice of the workers. And what's interesting about this report is that it seems like they kind of failed to do that.
Yeah.
At pretty much every step of the way.
Yeah. It's so.
And the report itself is.
Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's incredibly detailed. Like, you've went through court documents, correspondence, all these legal principles. You really laid it all out.
Yeah, it's structured almost like a legal investigation.
It is.
So it's fairly easy to follow.
Yeah.
And so one of the big figures that pops up right at the beginning of this story is Harrison Thompson. And he was the EPA's industrial relations officer.
Yeah. And, right from the get-go, we see a red flag with him.
Okay.
He misclassified the case.
Okay.
He called it a general dismissal instead of a wrongful dismissal due to redundancy.
Okay. So explain to me, like, why is that such a big deal? Because I could see someone listening to this being like, well, I mean, a dismissal is a dismissal, right?
Right. Well, think about it like this. You wouldn't try and play a soccer game using rugby rules.
Right.
You got to have the right framework to be effective in a legal case. And this misclassification, basically, it really hurt the officer's case right from the start.
So it's like you're setting yourself up for failure before you even begin.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. And so he misclassifies this. And then on top of that, the report also alleges that Thompson admitted to negotiating with RBC Royal Bank.
Yeah.
So the employer.
Right.
Without ever even telling the officers he was representing.
See, that's a huge problem right there, because unions have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of their members.
Well,
it's about trust and loyalty and secretly negotiating with the other side.
Right.
In a case like this that's so sensitive, raises some serious questions about, whose side was he really on?
Yeah, and it goes even deeper than that, because it doesn't sound like this was a one-time thing.
Yeah.
The report claims that Thompson routinely acted unilaterally, meaning that he made all these decisions about their case without ever even consulting them.
And that just shows, a complete disregard for the officers' voices.
Yeah.
Unions are supposed to be advocates, not, dictators calling the shots. And so it really makes you think about, well, what were the EPA's internal processes?
Yeah.
Were they really committed to representing their members fairly?
And all of this leads up to the first hearing on March 15, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, according to the report, at least Thompson completely fails to even argue the redundancy issue.
Yeah, and this is really frustrating because, as we've said, categorizing the case correctly is crucial from the beginning.
Right.
By not bringing up the redundancy issue early on, he basically allowed the case to keep moving forward on shaky ground.
Right.
And that put the officers at a huge disadvantage.
It's like ignoring a foundation crack in your house.
You
Like you can keep building up.
Exactly.
But eventually it's going
to come back to bite you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're already seeing like a pattern of missteps.
Right. Absolutely.
But it gets even more shocking because there's another part of the report that says that the officers weren't even told how much their legal representation was costing.
Yeah, that's not right. Workers have a right to know how their dues are being spent.
Right. Especially when it comes to legal fees in a case that affects them directly.
Right.
Imagine you're paying for a service and you don't even know about it.
Right.
And that service isn't even acting in your best interests.
Right. It's just not, right?
So it's like they were being kept in the dark the entire time. And then it even says that Thompson went so far as to make a private agreement with the legal firm, again, without the officer's consent.
Yeah, that's just adding insult to injury.
Yeah, it feels almost predatory.
It does, because these officers are already in a vulnerable position. They've lost their jobs.
Right.
And then to be kept in the dark about legal costs, it's just not right.
So we've unpacked some of what Harrison Thompson was allegedly doing, but there's another key player in this story.
Yeah.
And his name is Clay Hack. He was the EPA's legal representative.
Right.
And his actions or inactions, I guess we could say, are equally troubling.
Yeah, Hack's involvement is where things get even more complicated. He filed these affidavits that, really raised some questions.
Yeah.
His first affidavit relies heavily on what Thompson told him, which we already know was inaccurate.
So he's building this legal argument on information that's not even true.
Exactly.
Wow.
And even when the EPA got the actual notes from the hearings, which showed that Thompson's account was wrong, Hack didn't correct anything.
Oh, wow.
He had evidence that could have challenged what he initially said, but he didn't use it.
It almost sounds like he was deliberately trying to mislead the court.
It does make you wonder.
And what are the legal ramifications if that's the case?
Well, I mean, if you're deliberately misleading the court, that's a serious offense.
Right.
It could result in sanctions. You could even be disbarred.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be taken lightly.
And the report specifically points out instances where Hack's interpretation of those notes seemed very biased against the officers.
Yeah.
Which, of course, just hurt their case even more.
Absolutely. And that raises the question of what were his motivations? Was he truly acting in their best interests, or was there something else going on?
Yeah. And then there's this other really important detail that Hack just left out of his affidavits entirely.
Yeah. The report points out that he didn't mention the tribunal chairman's instruction for the EPA to renegotiate with RBC. This is crucial because that directive could have helped the officers.
Right.
Why wouldn't you include that?
Yeah, it feels like there's this pattern of just questionable decisions and omissions that are constantly working against these officers.
Absolutely.
And then to top it all off, we get to the special tribunal's appeal.
Right. So the very entity that ruled against the officers decided to appeal the case to the Privy Council.
Wow.
And the EPA didn't even try to fight it.
Doesn't make any sense.
Even though they had grounds to do so.
Why wouldn't they oppose that?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
The report offers two possibilities.
Okay.
Either the EPA was in collusion with the special tribunal.
Wait, collusion? Are you suggesting that they might have had like a secret agreement to sabotage the officer's case?
It's a possibility that the report raises.
And that's a huge accusation.
It is, and it's something that needs to be investigated further.
Yeah.
The other possibility is that the EPA was just incredibly negligent in their handling of the case.
Right.
Either way, they failed to uphold their duty to their members.
Right. And so we're seeing this kind of like two potential really bad scenarios here.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think we need to unpack those a little bit more and figure out like what's going on here.
Absolutely.
But we're going to do that after a quick break. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
I mean, the idea of collusion, that's a really serious thing to say.
Right.
Because it implies, that there was this deliberate effort to hurt these officers.
Right.
Which would just be a complete betrayal of what the EPA is supposed to stand for.
Right.
And the report points to specific things, like we talked about the stuff Hack left out of his reports. Or the fact that they didn't even try to fight the appeal as evidence of this potential collusion.
It's just wild to me that these people were let down at pretty much every step of the way by the very group that was supposed to be on their side.
It's a reminder that even institutions with, good intentions, they can get corrupted.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it can have real consequences for people.
It makes you question the whole system,
Exactly. And I think that's what this deep dive is really all about. It's not just about legal technicalities. It's about, what happens when we lose trust in the systems that are meant to protect us.
We've talked a lot about the EPA and this potential breach of fiduciary duty.
Right.
Can you kind of break that down for me? Like, what does that actually mean for these officers?
So, fiduciary duty sounds like, legal jargon.
Right.
But it's really about a basic sense of trust.
Okay.
The EPA had this legal and moral obligation to put these officers first.
Right.
And the report shows they didn't do that over and over again. It's like they were putting their own interests ahead of the people they were supposed to represent.
So it's not just incompetence or negligence. It's like they were deliberately working against their own members.
Exactly. And that can have serious consequences.
Right.
The officers could take legal action against the EPA.
Okay.
They could try to get back the money they lost, the legal fees they had to pay.
Yeah.
Even damages for the emotional distress they went through.
It's got to be so frustrating for them. I mean, imagine going through this whole ordeal.
Absolutely.
Being left in the dark, misled, and then abandoned by the very group that was supposed to help you.
It's heartbreaking.
So let's talk about what these officers can actually do now.
Okay.
The report mentions compensation claims, judicial review, and ethics complaints.
Right. So let's break those down.
Okay.
Compensation claims are basically about getting back the money they lost.
Yeah.
because of what the EPA did or didn't do.
Okay.
Judicial review is about challenging the EPA's actions in court to see if they were even legal in the first place.
Okay.
And then ethics complaints, those could be filed against Thompson Hack, even the people in charge of the EPA, to hold them accountable for their behavior.
So even after a decade of all this, these officers still have options.
They do, and this report, it's like their weapon.
Oh.
It gives them the evidence they need to fight for their rights.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's a little bit of hope in a situation that seems pretty bleak.
It's encouraging that there are ways to hold these institutions accountable.
Yeah.
But I think this case also raises some bigger questions about the role of unions in general.
Absolutely. I mean, unions are supposed to be the guardians of workers' rights.
Right.
But what happens when they fail so badly?
Yeah.
What can we do to prevent this from happening again?
What changes could Trinidad and Tobago make to their system to make sure this doesn't happen to other workers?
I think transparency and accountability are key.
Okay.
We need to give union members a way to report problems, to get information about their cases.
Yeah. And to hold their leaders responsible for their actions.
So it's about giving the power back to the workers.
Exactly. It's about making sure that the unions are truly working for their members.
This case really shines a light on the importance of legal resources.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of workers can't afford to get involved in these long legal battles.
Right, and that puts them at a huge disadvantage.
Exactly, especially when they're up against these powerful corporations.
It's that classic David and Goliath story.
Right, but it's not just a story.
Right, it's people's lives.
So what can we do to help level the playing field?
Well, we could make legal aid more available to workers.
Okay.
Especially for employment disputes.
Okay.
That way, everyone can get good legal representation no matter how much money they have.
Okay.
We could also encourage more lawyers to take on workers' cases for free. Or for a reduced fee, pro bono work.
Pro bono, yeah.
And maybe we should even think about setting up special courts just for labor disputes.
Okay.
Streamline the process and make things fairer. It sounds like we need a whole bunch of changes to really fix this problem.
We do. We need stronger unions, better legal protections, and just a better understanding of workers' rights.
On everyone's part.
Absolutely.
This has been really heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we dug into it.
Me too.
It's exposed some serious problems.
Yeah.
And it's made us think about some really important questions.
And hopefully it's made people realize that this fight for workers' rights, it's not over.
Yeah. This case happened in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
But it could happen anywhere.
Absolutely. These issues affect workers all over the world.
So what can we learn from this case? What can we take away from it?
I think the biggest lesson is that we can't just assume that institutions will always do the right thing.
Okay.
Even the ones that are supposed to be on our side.
Right.
We need to stay informed, get involved, and speak up when we see injustice.
It's easy to get complacent,
It is.
But if we want to see real change, we have to be active.
Absolutely. Our individual actions might seem small, but together they can make a difference.
This deep dive has taken us on a journey through legal complexities, ethical issues, and just some really unfair situations.
It's a story about the fight for dignity and fairness.
Exactly. And it's a fight that's not over.
I want to leave everyone with this.
Okay.
This case is just one example of a much bigger struggle.
Yeah, okay.
It's a struggle for a world where workers are valued, their rights are respected, and where justice is actually served.
This has been a really important deep dive.
It has.
Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we hope this has made you think.
Yeah.
And maybe even inspired you to demand better for workers everywhere.
Absolutely.
I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, where do you even begin?
Yeah.
But we can't let that stop us from doing something.
Absolutely.
So what can we do as individuals, to make a difference and to support workers who are going through similar things?
Well, I think it starts with awareness.
Yeah. Learn about labor rights and the challenges that workers are facing in your own community.
Yeah.
Support organizations that are fighting for those rights.
Okay.
Push for policies that promote fair labor practices.
Okay.
And maybe the most important thing, be a conscious consumer.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means supporting businesses that treat their employees well.
Okay.
And demanding transparency and accountability from the companies you buy from.
So it's about making ethical choices every day.
Yeah, exactly.
And using our power as consumers to push for change.
Right, because even though those choices might feel small, when we all do them together, it can have a huge impact.
This deep dive has been a lot,
Yeah.
We've gone through all these legal twists and turns. ethical questions, and just some really sad situations.
But it all comes back to this basic idea of dignity and fairness.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that this isn't just a story about Trinidad and Tobago.
Right, this is happening everywhere.
Yeah, it's a global issue.
Right.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that workers all over the world are facing these same challenges.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, ever get that glazed over feeling when you see a massive disclaimer? You know, like on a website or right before a movie starts, those walls of text.
Yeah, most people just skip right over them, right?
Totally. But today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of disclaimers. Specifically, one that really caught my eye. It's from a report about public records. And let me tell you, this disclaimer is a doozy.
Ooh, a disclaimer deep dive. I'm intrigued already. Disclaimers are like these little hints that reveal a lot about the info you're about to get.
It's true. And this one practically shouts from the rooftops about transparency and making sure the public is informed. Okay, ready to hear this thing?
Lay it on me.
All right, so it starts off like this. This report is based on publicly available court records, legal findings, and official documents. It is intended for public awareness and transparency. Seems pretty standard so far, right?
Yeah, they're doing their due diligence, establishing credibility right out the gate. Like, hey, we're not just making stuff up. This is all based on verifiable info.
Exactly. But then it takes this really interesting turn. It goes on to say, the report does not allege criminal wrongdoing, but presents verifiable procedural concerns. Readers are encouraged to review the official case records and form their own opinions. Okay, procedural concerns. Now we're getting somewhere. What's that all about?
That's a key distinction. It's like, imagine a basketball game, right?
Okay, I'm following.
Substantive concerns would be like arguing about whether a player actually made the basket. Did the ball go through the hoop or not? Simple. But procedural concerns are all about whether the rules of the game were followed properly. Did they travel before taking the shot? Was there a foul that wasn't called?
So this report isn't necessarily saying anyone broke the law, but maybe the way things went down, something wasn't quite right.
You got it. They're raising red flags about the process itself. And focusing on these procedural concerns can actually be incredibly impactful. Think about it. Sometimes a court case can get dismissed because of a procedural error. Even if there's strong evidence of wrongdoing, that dismissal can stand.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It happens more often than you'd think. And that's why this report's focus on verifiable procedural concerns is so important. It could uncover systemic issues that need to be addressed.
That's a great point. And what I find really interesting is they're not just saying, trust us, something's fishy. They're encouraging people to check it out themselves, which is pretty unique.
Absolutely. That line about readers being encouraged to review the case records and form their own opinions, that's huge. They're not telling you what to think. They're just laying out the facts and saying, here's the info, here's where we got it, now you decide.
That's a pretty bold move. Most reports just present their findings and leave it at that. This feels different, like they're trying to spark a real conversation.
It is different. It's almost like they're inviting the public to participate in the process.
So what kind of impact do you think this report, with its focus on procedural concerns, could actually have?
Well, it could potentially lead to all sorts of things. Audits, further investigations, maybe even legal challenges. By highlighting these potential procedural missteps, they might be opening up a whole can of worms.
Makes you wonder what other disclaimers are out there, hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be decoded. This one really opened my eyes to how much information is packed into these legal notices that most people just ignore.
It's true. And it's a good reminder that even the fine print can be fascinating, and understanding those details can give us a whole new perspective on the information we encounter every day. We should all pay more attention to the disclaimers we see. You never know what you might find.
Exactly. And that's what makes these deep dives so intriguing. What are the big takeaways?
I think the biggest one is that we can't just sit back and assume that the system will take care of us.
Yeah.
We have to be the ones to demand change.
Yeah, we have to hold these institutions accountable, even the ones that are supposed to be on our side.
Exactly. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and speak up when we see something wrong.
This case is a reminder that silence can be really dangerous.
It can.
If we want a world where workers are treated fairly, we have to fight for it.
And that fight starts with each of us.
This has been a heavy but really important conversation.
I agree.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope it's given you something to think about.
And maybe even inspired you to get involved.
To make a difference.
Because we can all be part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.